Welcome back, csc235 class, or even some people from 103. This is part 5 of our rock, paper, scissors, spring 2018. And we got up to the point where we're displaying everything, and we have them in colors. And now we're going to talk about points so that we can do like 2 out of 3, or if you get to 3 wins, then the game's over. So it doesn't just go on forever, to make it a little more interesting, because people like to win or lose. And what we're going to do to kind of collect points, we can use a variable to collect points, and we'll start with 0, and then we'll kind of add those points after that. So we'll make variables called y points and c points. And we already had the one called mess. We use that to actually shorten part of our JavaScript so that we can apply different things to mess, and it basically represents all this word. So it's just a shorter way of writing all that text, which kind of helps things. So what we're going to do is focus on points and adding up points right now. We already did this with the color. And to add up points, what we're going to do, now we're going to have to add up points when you win or lose. That's how we're going to add them up. But to actually get our points, or to check them and make sure they got to a certain level or value, we're going to create a whole other function for just checking points, because we don't want to throw all this stuff inside our existing functions. That's just too much, and it'll get too complicated. So we'll create a whole other function called checkpoints, and then we could just run this checkpoints function, or call this checkpoints function within our other functions right before they end. So right before they end, right after you click the button and it ends, it'll check to see if you had a certain amount of points, and then it'll do whatever it needs to do. It might say game over, you win if the game's over. If not, it might just keep going. It might display, there's the color for the message. It might disable buttons. So if you don't want if the game's over, the buttons should be disabled. And notice that it's disabled whether the computer wins or you win, but we're going to create 2 different conditions, because you'd like to know if the computer won or you won. But everything in there is true. And notice that it says disabled equals true. It won't say, the buttons are enabled equals false. It'll say disabled equals true. So when you want to enable the buttons, we'll say disabled equals false afterwards. So when you start all over, you're going to want to enable the buttons again. But we're going to use something called disabled equals true, which will disable buttons. And that's why we gave the buttons ID names. So we're going to make a function called checkpoints. But before we do that, let's make variables first to collect our values. So let's get out of our CSS and go back here. I'll stretch this out a little bit. And we'll go back up where all our variables are, and we'll create some more variables, and there's going to be 2 here, and we'll say var, and we'll say c points, because we're going to collect points for each, equals 0, so they'll just start off with 0. And wherever you miss semicolons, let me put that in there. And then the second one will be called var y points, because that's for you. And we'll start that at 0, so they'll start at 0. And basically what's going to happen is if you win, you get a point. If they win, they get a point. So we only have to apply points when they win. So what that means is if I start with rock, I'm going to go here, and if I win, I'm going to say, now I already have the variable started off. I already have it defined or declared as c points or y points, or both of them. So I'm going to say y points, if you win, y points equals, and you could say y points plus 1. Now we can shorten this, because this is actually kind of longhand, but that's really, there's nothing wrong with showing how it's going to work. You're going to say y points equals 1, and it's going to basically add a point. And this one, if computer wins, this is actually going to be c points equals c points. So you get a point if you win, they get a point. Nobody gets any points if there's a tie. We don't subtract any points right now. So what I'll do here is just kind of copy this and then move on to the next one. And again, if you win, in addition to being green, you're going to get a point. And if you lose, in addition to being red, computers are going to get a point. And I've got to make sure I change them to C. And then I'll do it one more time for pick scissors. I'll just keep pasting the Y1 and then changing the second Y1 to C points, because that's for computer, and that's why it kind of helped that I'm always doing the lose. When I lose, it's always the second one, and it's always the computer. So now we're gathering up the points. Now we don't know what's really happening with the points yet. We're not doing anything with them yet. I mean, you could certainly even output a console to see what points are when you do this. You could keep track. But for now, we're going to create a function after our other two functions, and we're just going to call it checkpoints, and we'll use a capital P, and we'll put our, and this will be conditional, so we're going to have two conditions. We're going to have if, and then we're going to have an else if. Or you could even do two ifs. It could even work with two ifs. But we're basically going to say here is if, and our condition is going to be, and our first one we'll do it if we win. We'll say if y points, and we'll say 3 equals 3. So basically, if you get 3, the game's over. The other one, I think I did 2 in the sample. We could say 3 here. And then if I do 3, and now this is, you got to watch this because remember, there's 2 curly brackets inside the if, or for the if, and there's still 2 curly brackets for the entire function that we're working on here. So we're going to put a statement here. So if we win, we're going to say mess, and we already made this variable for mess, so that helps us. We can say mess dot inner HTML, and we don't have a variable. We could just say this. We don't have to make a special, let me put my equals here and then double quotes. We don't have to make a special variable because we're not, we'll just type it because we're only going to do it one time. So we're just going to say let's say you win, because you want to see that first, because if it's more positive, you win, and then we'll say game over. Then we know the game's over. Okay, and we also want to put in a color, so we'll make sure that the color is, and I'll just copy this and I'll change it to green. It's still going to be green if you win, so I'll make that green. It'll be the same green. You could do another green for the game over thing, and it's going to be green if you win. So that it says you win, game over if the points get to 3. Now we didn't disable the buttons yet. That's going to be something else that happens, but let's do the second part and then we'll worry about the buttons. And then we're going to do the else if, and then in parentheses this is going to be if C points equals 3. So I'll just copy and paste that in there and make that C points. So we have to put the other scenario here, and then remember that has an opening and closing curly bracket. So there's going to be 6 of them altogether. 2 for the function, 2 for the if, and 2 for the else if. And we won't put an else in here. We're only going to put an else if because those should be the only conditions that we have. And then I'll just copy this because it'll be pretty much the same. And the message, if computer wins, you could say you lose, or I might say game over, you lose, or whatever message you want to say. Game over, you lose. So that says game. This is more of a negative thing and says you lose, so you know it kind of gets across the idea that you lost. Now it's not going to be green, it's going to be red. So that's all we need right there. Now if we're done, we want to disable the buttons. And to do that, like I said over here, we're just going to get the element by ID and say disabled equals true. So we could probably copy one of the get element by IDs. Let's just copy this one. That's an easy one. And I'll put this one here, and it'll be the button, and I'll call this rock button, because remember we used the BTN rock button, and it's not going to be inner HTML. It's called disabled equals true. And let me just double check to make sure true is not in quotes. It's not a string. It's actually a state. True is actually a Boolean state. It's true or false. So it's not in quotes as a string. So that's why it doesn't have a string on it. It's not a variable either, but it's a state. So we're saying disabled equals true. And now since we have this one, I'm going to copy it and paste it 2 more times and change this to paper. And make sure that you have paper button and you have scissors button, and they're named like that. You know, you want to make sure that that's what you gave your IDs. That's why we did the IDs right from the beginning. Rock button, paper button, scissors button. It's kind of cut off, but that's it. There it is. So I have those right. And there I have them right here. And they're going to disable these buttons. And they're also going to be disabled even if you lose. So I'm also going to put that right after here. There's probably another way to shorten this, that it could just be, although you still want to make sure that the points get up to 3. So like I tried just putting this outside of these curly brackets, and it just disabled them immediately because it never checked to get to 3 points. So that's why we're putting these here and we're putting these here. There's probably a easier way to consolidate code, but for now, that makes sense. Our buttons should be disabled once somebody gets to 3 points. So let's save this and see if it works. Here's rock. All right, I lost. Let me try rock again. I tied. Let me try paper. I tied. Paper, lost again. So the next time I lose, game should be over. Let me try rock. Stalemate. Let me try rock again. I won. Let me try rock again. Stalemate. All right, there's 3 times. Okay, it's not working. Why is it not working? Well, because we made the function, but where's the function being called from? It's not. We didn't call the function yet, and we actually did it right. I think it looks okay. What we're going to do is we're going to call the function, which is called checkpoints, or checkpoints. We're going to run it, and where it has to run is it has to run every time you hit the button, and we didn't do that. So we're going to put it right at the very end after our last else statement. So I could put it right here. I could put another line, but I'll put it right here and put a semicolon, and I'll run it right there, and then I'll just copy it, and I'll make sure that we check points after everything else. So we're going to check points is the last thing we're going to do every time we hit a button. So we're going to call that function, and it's going to check points for us. So every time we get to the end of these functions after you hit the button, it should go through here and see what's going on. So let's see if that works. Let me save it again, and we'll play one more time. Rock, stalemate. Okay, now I'm down 1. I think I'm down 2. Now I'm up 1. Game over. You lose. Buttons are now disabled. So that's exactly what we want, except now we can't reset it. And resetting is going to be the very last part of this, but that works okay. So we can't reset it right now other than just refreshing. So let me stop here with part 5, and the very last part 6, is just going to be resetting, which is pretty easy. We already did that in other exercises, but we'll do that as our last part. So I'll stop here with part 5, and then we'll continue with part 6 as our very last part. I guarantee you that will be the last part of the video for rock, paper, scissors.